So our next session is a conversation with the opposition. We had hoped that Senator McKenzie would be able to be here with us in person, but a combination of what is a little bit of an unusual Friday morning Senate session and some travel intricacies, shall we say, has combined to mean
Thank you, Alan Joyce.
Yes, that we are now going to be virtual. So welcome, Senator. You really don't need much of an introduction, but of course you are the shadow for infrastructure, transport and regional development, a National Party senator from here in Victoria, and clearly a very passionate advocate for regional Australia. We all know that the senator has held a very broad range of senior leadership roles, both within the National Party, but also key cabinet roles in coalition governments, which have had a real focus on economic portfolios. So obviously a very good background for the shadow portfolio that she now finds herself in. Now, I guess I could have had the opportunity to make a few jokes about wouldn't life be different if we had a high-speed rail link between Canberra and Melbourne, or maybe even a train from Tullamarine? Yeah, 100%, exactly. But we don't. So here we are.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. We've had a series of very vibrant conversations today. We've heard a lot from the Minister about guiding principles, about values, about equity, the need for economic security, decarbonisation, for this to be sort of key principles around prioritising infrastructure investments. But I think I'd be very interested to hear from you initially where you see the big infrastructure challenges and opportunities, and what you think Australia needs to get right in the sort of medium to long term.
Yeah, well, thanks, Diane. It's great to be with you, and I would have loved to have been there in person, but Qantas wasn't for me today. But I think when you come to those sort of questions, you really, how you answer is around what sort of Australia you want us to be in, decades to come. And I want us to be a very strong, prosperous, sustainable and safe place to live for our citizens. And so that's the principles, I guess, that I bring to my decision making. I'm obviously a National Party senator, so I'm interested in equity and service provision and ensuring that our regions are not left behind, particularly in their role as the powerhouse and economic driver, not just of historically, but I have a great ambition for that to continue well into the future. And also to ensure that our infrastructure investment, I've got leave, so I don't need to go to that bell. Infrastructure investment ensures equity intergenerationally and also intra-generationally. I think the big challenges that we've got coming forward is the issue of decarbonisation, a decision that was taken by both sides of politics in this country, the first time ever, and I think the significance of that particular outcome has been missed. I think that both sides of the Australian Parliament want to see a net zero economy for Australia by 2050. We just have very different ways of wanting to get there. And I think the infrastructure portfolio in particular can play a key role in assisting. And if we get the key decisions wrong along that journey, it will have negative outcomes, not just for us environmentally and with our emissions, but I think also with our economy. So for me, the two challenges, I know you've heard a lot about the micro infrastructure issues, workforce, etc. today, and I'm sure you're well across those issues. But how do we deliver on the AUKUS deal from an infrastructure perspective, and also the role that energy plays going forward over coming decades? If you see the increase in steel inflation alone in recent ABS documents, you can sort of see that having affordable energy available across our economy in decades to come is going to be critical to making sure infrastructure projects for all levels of government and private investors is actually affordable. And that means looking at things like nuclear energy, which the International Energy Agency itself says that technology, also with carbon capture and storage, are two technologies that the globe needs to actually use to ensure that we reach our global ambition to net zero, but also keep our economy strong.
I think we could have an entire conference on nuclear, yes, no, energy transition and so forth, and we'll have a session on this actually right after this one. But I must say that you have really, honed in on one of the big conversations that we have been having here today, which is about this long-dated nature of everything that you need to do in infrastructure. And I think it was the Deputy Premier of Victoria who expressed it quite simply, that often the people who make the decision and take the heat up front are not the people who get to cut the ribbon when the project is delivered. So I'm interested in how you see Infrastructure Australia. Now, there's a review underway. Is Infrastructure Australia the way that we can potentially keep the flame through projects? What are you hoping it might be able to do? If there is changes required, it's going to have to be changes in the Act. So what's the opposition hoping to see from this review?
We want to see, obviously, Infrastructure Australia perform its role in assessing projects right across the country to give governments of the day the confidence to invest, and a series of information in which to prioritise projects. Now, at the end of the day, and I'm sure the Minister herself would agree, that governments, because we are a democracy, governments of all colours are going to want to invest in particular projects for their own particular reasons. And that is, the life in a liberal democracy. But Infrastructure Australia review has been completed, and the Infrastructure Australia bill, I think we've got that being tabled. I'm looking at my staff, I think it was this week in the House, but we're definitely looking at debating that over coming weeks. The bill would seem to narrow the scope of Infrastructure Australia. We're only going to have 3 commissioners, and I'd be asking, are any of them going to be rural and regional Australians, given the importance of infrastructure in ensuring equity across the regions and economic development? But also we want to make sure the bill also suggests that it's going to see a narrowing of the scope of Infrastructure Australia, which I'm not sure we want to see. We know some states have their own infrastructure assessment bodies, but the role of these bodies in government decision-making, I think, is still going unclear with the current government, given their $2.2 billion commitment to the suburban rail loop hasn't been through the Infrastructure Australia process. So how government uses Infrastructure Australia still remains to be seen. So I'd like to see robust methodology that actually takes into account some of the things that I care about, like long-term economic advantage to rural communities and investment rates, etc., in a way that ensures that no matter who's in government, we're not cutting funding to certain communities and certain key infrastructure projects that are going to deliver benefits overall.
That very much is the theme of this conference, about delivering both economic and social value. And we've had some very good conversations about things like provision of water. Access to clean water is a basic human right. Can you make a business case for it in all the places that people want access to it in Australia? How do you think about that? And I think that comes to your point there about the importance of balancing regional development versus expenditure in the very large population centres. And that's a question that has come up from our audience, and I think might take you to how you think about that and how you think about projects like Inland Rail, in providing jobs and economic opportunities to regional Australians. So we'd love to hear about how you think about that balancing of regional development versus the very large population centres and expenditure there.
Well, that's one of my former ministerial roles, and I was really excited with the regional development work we were doing in that policy area. We were able to deliver, I think, in excess of $9 billion in the March budget to really hone in on the catalysing investment into rural and regional communities to safeguard, if you like, against the decisions of both sides of politics towards net zero, so that they could harness the opportunities that that's going to bring, but also assist them to overcome some of those challenges. Unfortunately, that was all cut, so I'm looking forward to the Labor government in increasing the ambition, also thinking about and being realistic about who pays the cost for those decisions and making sure we get the policies right to support growth in a decarbonised Australia going over coming decades. But the Inland Rail project, first envisaged very, very long ago as a project that was going to, cart wheat as a bulk commodity from one end to the other, and, almost 20 years on from that first sort of look at it, we're seeing a catalytic project which already, whilst it's simply under construction, has supercharging the regional economies that it's going through, thousands of jobs and investment. We've got the intermodals, hubs that are being developed in places like parks, the spin-off economic development that's occurring around a community like parks is just mind-blowing, with people moving from all around the country to these what used to be small country towns or regional centres that I hope over coming decades will become 21st century regional capitals with everything to offer and all the opportunity that's available in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. And I can see that happening simply because a government took the bold decision to put the money on the table and get Inland Rail built. And there are, I think in the shop review, and I know you've heard from Kerry today, she will, I'm sure, disclosing challenges, the way things could have been done better. But I think when we look at this project, when it is completed, we're all going to be very proud, both sides of government, depending who cuts the ribbon, on the benefits that it will be bringing, not just to the communities it traverses through, but indeed our nation. It really is a nation-building project. It's going to change the way we do business and change the way, that these communities exist along its route.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. And
the other thing I was going to mention about the Inland Rail, so when it was first conceived in 2005, nobody thought about what contribution this project would make to lowering emissions, because we weren't even having those sort of debates and discussions. But the role that this Inland Rail will play in getting B-doubles off our roads, which will lead to great safety outcomes, but indeed incredible emissions outcomes, because we know the transport sector itself is one of those huge ones. And the fun stat I have is the 1,800-metre Inland Rail train will have the capacity to carry the same volume as 110 B-double trucks. So every day, getting that amount of trucks off the road to shift everything that comes in on our ports, all the containers, there's going to be double stacked, etc., is going to be amazing. And I think we all need to be very, very proud of the role the Inland Rail project will play in decarbonising our transport sector, particularly our heavy sector.
Yes, I'm of course from Western Australia, where the Inland Rail won't be, but I have to say, having spent last week driving 4,000 kilometres through from Perth up to the Pilbara and back again, and having come across not just B doubles but triples and quads, which can go up to 57.5 metres long. Any of those that we can get off our roads will certainly lower my blood pressure as I attempt to pass them. We have really...
I think you raise a really great... I was over in the West a few weeks ago and I met with the transport industry. We've got that, the terrible situation in the Kimberley, the bridge is out, the roads are degrading, the Tanami, they were saying the Tanami needs to be brought forward as one of their key freight routes, but they were very concerned about the quality of road and the impact it's having on the trucking industries, the truckers themselves in terms of their health outcomes. So I think we could all do better in getting more trucks off the road. And I don't think the trucking industry sees it as a us or them. I think they're very, very keen to have a collaborative discussion with rail about how we all can make the freight task more efficient and effective and safer and more prosperous for Australians.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely spot on, Senator. We've had a lot of conversation about that interoperability, and I don't agree with you. I do not think it is a competition between road and rail. We have really come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for being with us. I know it just seemed to go, didn't it?
We're just getting started.
Look, this is the classic consultant question, and that's my background. Is there anything you really wanted to tell us that I didn't give you a chance to?
No, well, I know everybody that's interested in this space is in that room, and I just wanted to reach out and say I have a very public email. I have an office, and I'm very keen to engage on these issues because you're right. This is $120 billion pipeline over decades, and we've got to get it right. And we've got the minister that's making the announcement will very rarely ever be the minister cutting the ribbon. And I want us to have a constructive conversation about how to make our country safer, more prosperous, sustainable and strong. So please don't be strangers. I'm keen to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Can we thank the Senator in the usual way?